Hello and welcome to another episode of The Practical Side. This is the show where we get experts from different fields of law and make you understand the practical side of law. And today joining me is a very special guest, Advocate Sudhir K. Shankar. Hello sir, welcome to The Practical Side.
Hi Alok, thanks for having me on the show.
So Sudhir K. Shankar is an advocate with more than 15 years experience. He has completed his masters in law and also he was one of the early adopters of the cyber laws, and he's been practicing in that field for more than 1.5 decades. And Sudhir is an expert where he's advised different companies on the cyber laws, and he's also come up with some very unique solutions in this field. And today he'll be sharing with us the basics about the Information Technology Act and the future prospects of cyber law. The first question we want to ask is, what was the reason for the Information Technology Act to be enacted in India? If you could share the context and the background, why did the government take this big step?
It's a very interesting question. In fact, the Information Technology Act that we have today is not something which evolved from our country or from a legal process. It was a compulsion that we had to comply to the UNCITRAL requirement, that is United Nations Commission for International Trade Law, which was formed in the year of 1996. Under the International Commission for Trade Law, there was a lot of requirement to set up a lot of standardizations in the legal process, which also includes arbitration. And as a part of the technology law, the requirement was that there has to be harmony in the legal system. One of the main reasons that we have to understand, Alok, is that when it comes to law, it's all country specific, as you know. Laws are made by the parliaments of the respective countries or the monarchies, depending on the jurisprudence of the land and the ethos of the culture. So the civil, the criminal and the jurisprudence is all unique to each country. But when it comes to the field of information technology, I believe information technology is the greatest leveler. So there is no modern world or the first world country, or there is no third world country. So when we are using technology, so technology makes all of us
equal
on the same platter. So we all stand on the same platform, whether it is the US or it is the Polynesian Islands or the aboriginals of Brazil. The WhatsApp remains to be the same. So what happens is, when we talk about a world which is connected through internet and the flow of information happening globally and businesses happening globally, there is a requirement to bring harmony in terms of the legal framework which is associated with business. So mainly UNCITRAL platform or UNCITRAL model law was a model which was recommended for all the nations of the world. It is not just India, all the nations of the world, so that when it comes to technology based commerce or e-commerce as we call it, there has to be a common understanding of the problem and a common understanding of the solution. So to give you an example how it works, let's say for example in India we have a law, a contract with an e-contract, let us say with a merchant in US. So let us say iPhone 12, they have offered a sale where at between 12 o'clock midnight and 12 o'clock 1 minute in the midnight, they are offering iPhone 12 at $99. So there will be a global queue for it.
Exactly.
Then me and you become lucky to buy one, and we buy it online, paid through our credit card. And when we receive it, instead of receiving a black phone, we end up receiving a gray phone. Or instead of a 128 GB, I get a 16 GB. Now where do I dispute? Now if you look at the box, it says jurisdiction California. But I have made payment from India. Now which law do I adopt? Is it the Californian technology law or the principles of US, or do I adopt the Indian Contract Act on the basis of offer and acceptance? So these are the issues which come up in e-commerce, and some of the crucial components are the concept of offer, acceptance and consideration.
Yes.
So these three concepts of offer, acceptance and consideration had to be harmonized. So therefore the United Nations committee recommended this model law and shared it with all the countries of the world, and India was supposed to adopt it in 1996, but we ended up adopting it in 2000. Later, there was an evolution where another revision of the law was made in the year of 2000, which was supposed to be adopted in 2000. We adopted it in 2006. Now, there is an updated revision which has to be adopted, but we are yet to go there. So, the Information Technology Act, which was passed on October 17th, 2000, was passed in a matter of 2 minutes without a debate, no questions asked. And along with Information Technology Act, I believe 25 other laws were also passed. So, India got its information technology law without really understanding what it is and the implications of what it is, and we are bound to follow it. So, this is how we got into the information technology or cyber law by surprise as a legal system.
Also by force, like you told.
We had a compulsion, we had to comply. And to enable this, we had to bring in a framework which would essentially enable e-commerce. So, our journey into cyber law and information technology law is, I would say, by surprise, and we started learning it gradually, eventually, then understood that the corners are more than what we think.
Exactly. So, I think before I even go to the next question, I want to draw the attention of students that this is the value add when you speak to an expert. That is, see, all of you as students, you know what is offer, acceptance, you know that in basics of contract, but connecting that with the cyber laws or the entire harmonizing of the laws globally with respect to information technology, that angle I think was really value add for us. Going further in this act, what are the primary objectives of this act, and how does this act go about meeting those objectives?
Okay, it's a interesting question. As I said, the primary objective of the law was to enable e-commerce, but broadly speaking, we can say there were 5 major changes which happened in the Indian legal system after the act came into force. The first one was recognition of electronic documents. Until the Information Technology Act came into force, Indian legal system did not recognize electronic records as valid admissible legal evidence. Though we had the Telegraph Act, which vaguely covered what is an electronic document and the presentation of which by virtue of CPC and Indian Evidence Act could be done in the court,
it was not designed for it.
Exactly. So, our legal system, what was developed around paper, the physical document. So, the Indian Evidence Act essentially talks about 3 types of evidence, that is primary, secondary and circumstantial, and a printout of an electronic document has always been held as a secondary document. To give you an example, our conventional courts or the conventional methodology of appreciating an evidence as a primary source is that if you take a film camera and you give a color print or a black and white print of a film, you need to attach the film as well. So, the film is the primary and the print is the secondary. So, the same logic is adopted by the court for an electronic record. So, now when you submit an email, the court expects you to submit a soft copy or a server copy or a log record or whatever it is. Until unless that happens, the court is not compelled to draw conclusion based on the secondary evidence produced. So, what happens is, until unless you have the capability to produce an electronic record as a primary evidence, your justice is always hampered. So, the electronic record was always held as a manipulatable document. So, therefore, the courts would not build in more reliance on it to arrive at conclusions. Only after Information Technology Act came into force, the word electronic record
got the legal record.
Exactly. Electronic document, network, data, all of that were defined for the first time. And after it is defined, parallel amendments were made in IPC, CRPC, Indian Evidence Act and Civil Procedure Code. And wherever in IPC, CRPC, Indian Evidence Act and Civil Procedure Code, the word document is used, in all those places it was added with electronic document. Yes, wherever there is a record used, there it is added as electronic record. So, which means that the legal system now recognizes electronic records and electronic documents as valid admissible legal evidence in the court of law. However, the manner in which you present that is also defined under the Indian Evidence Act, where under section 65 capital B, there is a process which is defined on how you have to present an electronic document to make sure that the integrity of the document is maintained. Even today, the court will consider an electronic document as a manipulatable record. So, if you have to overcome that limitation, you will have to comply to section 65 capital B of Indian Evidence Act. So, the first thing that happened is that electronic records got legal validity under the Information Technology Act. So, that is the first major tectonic shift in the approach to the electronic documents. So, after electronic records got validated, the second question that comes up is how do you authenticate it? Let us say, for example, you go and present a document in the court of law as evidence. Now, what is the due process under the Civil Procedure Code? You have to file an affidavit, which is a sworn statement, and you swear to the court of law that this document that is produced is original, and I swear by it, and I take an oath validating that this is a original document, and if you fail, then you have to face the consequences from the court. Now, how do you validate a electronic document in electronic form? That is the next big challenge that comes in. So, how do you sign an electronic document? For a physical document, we can sign an affidavit and we can submit an affidavit as a sworn statement. But how do you sign an electronic document? So, that is where the electronic signature or the digital signature infrastructure and the legal framework around that was built up. In fact, we have to, instead of calling it Information Technology Act, we should have called it the e-commerce law, if you ask me.
Yeah, but maybe it was too early for them to think of
e-commerce. Exactly. So, the whole purpose of Information Technology Act is to make sure that the electronic signature or the digital signature is validated and the integrity of the document is maintained and nobody hacks into the document. It was never really an information security law. It was mostly validating the document that is to be signed. So, the process of the certifying authorities who issue the digital signature, the technology that is to be used behind the digital signature, the way in which digital signature has to be issued to a particular person, and the manner in which it is to be used was structured in the Information Technology Act after electronic records were given validity. So, the digital signature certification process and the custody of the digital signature, just like a mobile number, all the mobile numbers are held by the government and issued by to others, the service providers, be it Airtel, Vodafone, BSNL, whoever it is. So, we know the serial numbers which are coming up. Similarly, there is a repository of digital signatures which is maintained by the union government, and a certain set of repository is handed over to the certifying authorities. So, certifying authorities will in turn issue it to the end user after doing a KYC, wherein you are able to identify a digital signature hash value to a living person. So, when you use this digital signature, you are able to attach the identity of the person who is signing to that electronic document. So, for this we have to understand some of the basics of how a signature works. So, when we try to understand what is a signature is basically a set of lines and scratches. It's unique to each individual, and the purpose that it serves is it attributes the identity of the person to the document to which he is putting his signature. So, authenticating, validating. So, there are parameters like uniqueness, identity, and attribution. So, it is attributed to him, and there is a non-repudiation.
Yes.
So, once he signs, he cannot withdraw that he has not done it. So, the same 4 parameters are expected out of a digital signature as well. So, this is where the digital signature law makes sure that one, the identity of the author, that is who is signing the electronic document, is established through a KYC process. Second, the uniqueness of that digital signature is ensured through the process of issuing the unique hash value to a digital signature at the process of issue. So, there is a unique hash code that is linked to each digital signature, which does not cannot be replicated to any other digital signature. Third, the moment you sign using a digital signature, you cannot withdraw or you cannot repudiate to say that I have not done it. At least in the physical document, you can repudiate to say that somebody has tampered it, somebody has changed it, I don't know.
No,
But
and here also you have the timestamp. So that is the biggest advantage when
Correct.
you look at it practically. They can't tell we did it in some other date.
Correct.
Once the timestamp is there, it's more authentic than a physical signature.
Exactly, exactly. So all these processes are achieved through the digital signature, and this entire process of issuing, controlling, regulating, monitoring the digital signature is achieved through Information Technology Act through the process of certifying agencies and the way in which they are monitored. So therefore, there is a set of rules that are drawn in the Information Technology Act called CA rules, Certifying Authority rules, where it is defined how they have to issue, what is the repository, what is the technology standards and all that. The initial standard was MD5 and SHA-1, the algorithms that are used for encryption were MD5 and SHA-1. Now they have been upgraded. Post 2010 update, they have been upgraded, but India we have not yet done that. We are still at MD5 SHA-1. The challenge that we are facing with MD5 SHA-1 is that both of these algorithms have already been hacked.
Oh, okay.
So which means that we are a step behind in terms of technology. We have to update to the new standards of digital signature, which is a legal process. So
it is bound to happen. It's a matter of time.
it's a matter of time. It is bound to happen, and as per the UNCITRAL commitment, whatever recommendations that the UNCITRAL issues, we will have to implement it in phased manner.
Yeah.
So this is how we come into the second phase of implementation of Information Technology Act by implementing the digital signature. Now that a document is signed, the third phase of the Information Technology Act is defining offences. Till now, we had never defined a electronic record and we had no approach to what is an electronic record. So we had a paper document and we had processes and offences associated with the paper document like manipulation, tampering, rewriting and all that. So if something happens of similar nature in a electronic document, it amounts to the same offence as it means in a paper, but we have to capture that. So therefore, the Information Technology Act defined offences and liabilities for civil damages, which is done under section 43 as well as 65, 66 and 67 of the Act. There are other intermediary rules under 68, 69 and 71 and 72, which are not applicable to a individual user per se, but it is also coming under the penalty clauses. So under the section 43 of Act, the Act defines very clearly what amounts to a manipulation of an electronic record, where it says any unauthorized usage, any tampering, any manipulation of the document without the consent of the owner of that record amounts to a manipulation of the electronic record, causing the integrity of the document to be diluted. Now, whether you remove one zero or a full stop, it does not matter. The integrity of the document is compromised. So for that, the law has provided for a compensation of civil nature to a tune of ₹5 crore, where there is an appellate authority under the Information Technology Act, where anybody who has lost any financial value or monetary damage, who has suffered a monetary damage, can approach and seek relief under the law. The good thing about Information Technology Act is, if you go before the appellate authority under the Information Technology Act, you need not have to pay the same court fees. The regular civil suit will draw at least 7 to 8% of the dispute value as court fees.
Then that will stop many people to even go approach the court.
Exactly, that itself is a limiting factor for many people.
Yes.
Here, the limitation is up to ₹5 crores for the appellate authority, but after 5 crores, if you have any claim, the claim will come to the principal district judge jurisdiction of the area where the victim lies. Then you are still attracting court fee. So there is an appellate process which has a pecuniary limit of 5 crores. Then you come back to the regular judicial system, where if any damages beyond 5 crores, you will have to avail it under the existing legal system. So section 43 civil damages and claims are structured this way. Then we come to section 65, 66 and 67, which are defined as offences. Now when we say offence, people always tend to believe that the offense in a cyberspace is on the person.
Yes, that is the general thought.
So some feel that no, my account is hacked, my identity is stolen and all that. See, an offense on the document is first thing. So what is an offense is that you are committing an offense of a document belonging to a particular person. So IT or information technology is a means of doing things. It is not the way of doing things. So offense or a fraud is a fraud. A regular pickpocketer would do it physically by removing a pocket. A hacker would do by emptying your wallet in a digital app. It's still pickpocket, but done in a different way. So now what happens is, under section 65, the law talks about tampering of source code. Now it's the terminology used here is a little confusing, because when the moment we say source code, we tend to believe source code is the way in which a software is defined.
Yeah, that is a general understanding.
General understanding. But under the Information Technology Act, a source code is understood as a log record.
Okay.
So for a computer, let us say a server, if somebody tampers the log record, which means he is destroying an evidence of the activity that is happened in that server, that amounts to an offense. So for any and everything that happens, including your mobile phone, there is a active log record that every application maintains. Now for this each and every application, if you end up deleting that log record, you are deleting that audit trail. And if that leads to an offense, in the sense, for example, telecom service providers, they are expected to maintain the log records of all the calls. If by selection they remove set of log records, making it incapable of conducting an evidence, then it amounts to deliberate destruction of evidence, which means tampering of source code under the law, number one. Then we come to section 66, which is hacking. Now hacking under the Act is defined in a very, very, very wide sense. So hacking in general terminology is understood as compromising the integrity of an electronic record in any way. That is how the law says. So if anybody changes, modifies, alters the integrity of an electronic record or makes it useless in any way, amounts to hacking. Now what is important is, for application of this law, intent behind that is very important. Now if you go by literal definition, Photoshop photo editing is also hacking.
Correct. True. If you go by what is there in the Act.
Literal definition, what you do in a Photoshop is manipulation of the original file to make it look differently. But the intent is not actual an offense. So the 2000 Act defined hacking as a manipulation of electronic record in any way, reducing its value and utility. Later in 2008 amendment, there were 6-7 modifications that were brought in, and it is also said that whatever is listed in section 43 is to be read with section 66. So anybody accessing any electronic record in an unauthorized way, causing its value to diminish and utility to go, or making it useless, everything becomes section 66 offense under the law now. Plus under 66 they added lot of clauses which have been new additions under 66A to 66F. They have added lot of clauses basically as an evolution. Now here we have to understand a little about jurisprudence, the way law evolves and the way law is made. As I told you, we got into information technology law by surprise. We never really applied our mind as to what is that we need. So Information Technology Act was never really an information security law in the first place. We all tend to confuse that it's an information security law. We know the objective of this is to provide information security. No, this is an e-commerce law which went on evolving for information security requirements. So lot of additions have been done under section 66, and 66A which was struck down by the Supreme Court. I believe 66A should have still continued. Because there is a lot of practical relief that people were getting because of 66A, where somebody publishes a content which is knowing to be false, just because to cause inconvenience and annoyance to the person who is against whom it is published. As you know, it was published against a famous political leader, and it was political retribution. They caught the person, they chased him, they hounded him, then Supreme Court struck it down. So all of things have happened. Now it is the law of the land. We have to admit it. There is no other way. But practically speaking, in a social world, especially in a digital world where there is a lot of atmosphere around the social life, this was essential. Very literally, this was essential. And as I said, while information technology law was brought in, none of these were considered as a problem, which has to be solved through a legal process. So therefore, Information Technology Act has been amended in a way which is not organic to the law, or what is the original intent of the law. If you read the preamble of the act, and the section 66 that you read don't really merge in terms of their intents. So, however, we still have that section 66A to 66F. Then we have section 67, which talks about transmission of pornographic or any material which is of lascivious nature, which may intend to or interest the prurient interest of the viewer. Now, this has been included under the new amendment in 2008 with child pornography. Now, what is interesting is the lawmakers, their intent may be genuine, but it says browsing is also an offence. How much legal thought or a parliamentary standing committee or a public discussion debate has happened, whether to include the word browsing has nobody has understood that. So it says browsing, any act of browsing child pornography or pornography is also amountable to the same punishment as the offence. I agree to a certain extent that yes, it is relevant, because when you search, it amounts to raising a demand.
Yes.
So that would amount to, legally speaking, abetting. So you are creating a demand. So you are creating, you are giving an option to people to make it lucrative. So people end up bringing children into pornography field. All that is agreed. But again, the motive is very important. Let us say I am a researcher in this field. I am doing my PhD, or I genuinely want to protect children by understanding what are the child pornography websites so that they can be blocked.
For your research purpose, you have to browse.
I have to browse. So even that is considered as an offence.
So,
of course, our Lati Danda police do not really can understand the depth of it, but there are people who have stuck really bad in this process. So section 67 talks about pornography, transmission of obscene material, and this is section 67 to F, again has been a new addition. So in the evolution of Information Technology Act, if we look at it, from 2000 to 2006, I think this is the only law where from 3 offences, 65, 66 and 67, now it is 18 offences, so which is like 600% increase. I have not seen any law which has seen so much of a modification or an inclusion
in such a short time,
in only offences. All the others may have evolved, but if you look at the list of offences, I think this is the highest one. And what the market says is that the growth of cybercrime year over year is now more than 3,500 to 3,600%.
In fact, that is also actually, that brings me to my next question. If the growth is so high, and this is something which cuts across the line, that is whether it's a company or whether it is in some of individuals, and most of the viewers here are students who are going to work in corporates, and also now what's happening is, in the corporates, company secretaries are expected not just to comply with the Companies Act or FEMA for that matter. I know a lot of company secretaries, especially in the IT companies, where the board expects the company secretary to even execute stuff in the Information Technology Act.
Correct.
So if you could share with us some of the career opportunities, or what is the wide range of KRAs, for example, which legal officer in the company who is handling the IT Act will be able to handle.
Okay. So now, as you rightly pointed out, we come to the gap on what is the market and where is the requirement and what is the supply for knowledge in this field. As I said, the growth of cyber crime is 3,000, 3,500, 4,000. Post COVID, I think it must have crossed 6,000% year over year. And there is an acute shortage of talent of every sort, right from a software professional who is security capable in terms of coding, to a network professional who is capable of configuring firewalls, antivirus systems and all other things, to a CISO, Chief Information Systems Officer or Chief Information Security Officer, who can define the barriers of the organization, to a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, who can drive the company in terms of security, to a CEO who can understand all this, to a board of the organization which can appreciate the requirements of the changing dynamics. In my experience, I'll give you 2-3 examples of how people learn the lessons in the hard way without the required knowledge. So there is X company which does an annual turnover of about 60-70 crores. They are into bulk chemical manufacturing for the agri pesticide and insecticide segment. They supply bulk of their producers to Europe and European manufacturers from India. Now what happens here is there is a targeted phishing attack which happens to the accounts department of the company, plus to the managing director and the board of the company, where the payments that were supposed to come to this company are siphoned off by creating one more account in the company's name only, for which the company was oblivious. They never knew this was happening. They could not appreciate that this was a targeted attack, and they ended up sharing credentials. As a result of that, what was a sum of rupees 6 million euros, which was supposed to come to them, has gone to their own account for which they don't control.
So that's a classic case of what can happen.
What can happen if the corporate management is not able to appreciate the security risks involved in cyberspace while running a company. So here you don't require network security professionals because IT team was never breached.
Yes.
What is breached is accounts, finance and the board. So here is where I see a large role for students in the field of law, in the field of secretary services, in the field of chartered accountancy, who end up becoming the handholders for decision making in an organization, to be aware about the pitfalls that an organization may face in any line of business. The reason why I gave you the example of a pesticide manufacturer is that they are not IT.
It's totally unconnected.
They are not Oracle, they are not Google, they are not some IT major doing IT business. They are into chemical business, that too agri chemicals, but they are still hit by a cyber crime, a cyber attack, a targeted attack, and that is taken by the board.
Exactly.
So here at the leadership level, at the corporate leadership level, at the secretarial leadership level, what is expected is that the secretaries, the accountants and the managers of the companies or the COOs of the companies need to be told and they have to be handheld in activities like this, because cyber law, as I said, Information Technology Act, was a surprise to us, and it's an e-commerce law which is retrofitted and done some alterations to suit the immediate requirement, but it will not stop there. Now as we have evolved in due course of time, every industry will have their own flavors of cyber law. If you ask me, I don't see it's only a short time that I see that insurance industry will have its own information security law. Stock market will have its own information security framework. Already we have Personal Data Protection Act,
Exactly.
PDPA, which talks about general personal data protection. Now, what is the impact of personal data protection on all the personal data that we are using on mobile phones and social media? Now, there is a legal implication for which a company secretary is expected to guide the company.
Yes.
Because under the Personal Data Protection Act, a first offense or a first breach will cost an organization a penalty of rupees 1 crore. Second will cost them 5 crores. And if it is a service provider, an intermediary, it may go up to 50 crores. So now, as an organization who is dealing with data of any sort, even if data is not my business.
Exactly. As long as you have data.
As long as I have data, I have to understand my responsibility of protecting the data, and if I fail there, then I may have to close my shop to pay the penalty.
Exactly. It's such a huge penalty.
The implications are huge. And the world is walking to this direction because people are becoming more and more conscious about the business models around data. Till now, people never really equated data to money.
Yes.
Because people never really understood. They saw it as a utility. They saw email as a utility. They saw Facebook as a utility. But now, if you look at hindsight, all our existence is dependent on these technology-driven solutions.
That's why they say data is the new oil.
Data is the new oil. So, who controls data and what is the terms of control is not defined. It is all in the favor of the companies who are giving the data. So, therefore, there is a lot of stepped up approach, not only in India, Singapore, Malaysia, Jakarta, everywhere across the globe. The countries and the legal system are waking up to this challenge, and the business models will change, and there will be a lot of regulation on data. Second, now there is a concept and discussion on sovereignty of data, data sovereignty, that is Indian data versus American data.
Where is it originating from?
So, when it is identity is attached and the nationality is attached to a particular data, it becomes a sovereign. So, it is as good as your land. So, the obligation of protecting sovereign data is on the state. So, now state is using that force, that muscle to bring in a lot of regulation. So, now what happens is you cannot call data really your private information. It is a part of a nation. As you are a part of a citizen, as a citizen you are a part of a nation, now your data is also a part of a national repository. So, this is going to completely transform the way we have understood businesses, change the way we have traditionally worked, and completely give a reorientation. Now, added to this, if we bring the artificial intelligence and the machine learning mix, the potential for disaster is unbelievable, exponential. So, here is where the key decision makers of companies have to update themselves about all these developments, understand the legal implications associated with them, and not only be aware for their personal life, but also be aware and implement it and practice it in their professional life. So, the opportunities are immense, and it is not going to be limited to IT industry only.
No, in fact, as you were speaking, I think for students to understand, we can equate this to somebody in the early 90s saying that you become a software engineer, this is going to be evergreen for next 30-40 years. So, if you become an expert of cyber laws, the Information Technology Act and everything around it, that is the future is what you are sharing.
So, if you look at the global assessments, for every rupee earned, for every rupee spent, for the next 30 to 45 years, people will end up spending nearly 15 to 18% of their earning on information security in one or the other way. Corporates, directly or indirectly. So, corporates will end up spending nearly 20 to 22% on information security.
So, if they are spending so much, you need enough number of brains and people who are experts in that.
So, this is expected to grow in India at least to $1 trillion economy in the next 3 to 5 years. The resource gap in India is that India needs at least 1 million cyber security professionals within 2025.
So, that's like 10 lakh
a million within 2025 and 10 million by 2030.
Okay, that's like 1 crore.
So, for a country of our size, this is the gap that is right now facing us.
Huge gap.
There is a huge talent gap, which means huge opportunity.
Exactly.
The opportunity is huge. So, with somebody with a knowledge of secretarial services, taxes and corporate management brings this, is going to be a hot cake in the market.
Exactly. I think that's something which everyone should take a leaf out of, that apart from becoming an expert in company law, which you are expected when you study a course like CS or CA, or even for lawyers for that matter, it is high time that you can consider the Information Technology Act and generally the cyber laws as a whole, which can be a great career opportunity for you. I want to close this discussion with one question. As a person who's been around for more than 15 years in this field and a keen observer of what's happening around the world, how do you see the future of cyber laws, particularly the legal side in India? Because what has happened from 2000 to 2021, a huge change has happened in the technology. There have been a sea change. I mean, in 2000 there was no iPhone or even a touchscreen phone, but now everything else has changed, from AI to VR, everything is coming. But we still have the Information Technology Act 2000 and few amendments after that. So, how do you see the future for cyber laws in India?
The way I look at cyber law is that there is going to be an immense sense of nationality that is going to come in. So, which means that as of now there are 2 standing committees working on this at the Parliament, and we will have our own industry specific cyber laws going ahead, which will talk about the nuances and the concerns of the specific industry in the field of electronic ways of doing things. Plus, as you rightly said, data is oil. In the global population, which is about 7 billion or 700 crore, we have about 21 to 22% of the global population with us.
Exactly.
So, which means we have about 22% of global data in-house. So, now with this 22% of global data, India is now realizing that this data is what is going to drive the economy. So, therefore, the starting baby steps that we are taking is to ensure privacy. Once the privacy happens, then there is another law which is behind this Personal Data Protection Act, which is called as the DISHA, Digital Information Security in Health Industry Act. So, DISHA is going to give focus Digital Information Security in Health Industry Act. DISHA is going to give focus of all the data that are associated with the health records of an individual. Similarly, we will have a law which talks about all the financial data of an individual. We will have a law which is going to talk about identity of an individual. We will have a follow-up law with the National Citizens Register, which covers the identity of our country. So, information security law in cyberspace or cyber laws in general is going to evolve in segment wise, industry wise, into a bunch or a cluster of laws.
Exactly.
Plus, now digital identity and digital voting is going to be a reality. We are already doing it digital, but still physically activating it.
Yes.
Bitcoins are going to be a reality, however people may like it or not. Bitcoin is going to be a reality. We are going to use the technology behind the Bitcoin in a different way to drive the economy. So, for that we will have a separate governing law which is going to regulate how the coins are going to be issued by RBI. It is not that Bitcoins are going to be run freely, it is going to be issued by RBI. As long as RBI is issuing it, it is within the legal framework. It is. So, therefore, the evolution, as I look at it, in the next 5 to 7 years, we will have at least 3 to 4 specific industry specific and subject specific laws on information security for that particular area, and it is going to organically grow along with the society.
Yeah. So, I think also for students to understand, this is similar to how the Companies Act, like first we had the Companies Act, then because of the Harshad Mehta scam we had SEBI coming into picture, then SEBI Act, then parallel to that we already had the SCRA Act, then we got different economic laws, then after the liberalization we had FEMA. So, same way we are in that time or in that phase of history where cyber laws is very much in its nascent stages.
Correct.
Despite the IT Act itself being a little over 20 years old. And like our guest today has shared, that there will be many more laws. Some have already come into picture, some are in the stage of the bill and discussion in the parliament, and few more are going to come about in the next future. So what we really invite all the students who are watching this is that at least start exploring, start learning more about cyber laws. This is just probably a seed for you to start today with this interview and this wonderful discussion, and you can definitely consider this to be a future career for you along with being a company secretary, because it goes in hand. It is not something totally different. It's not like you're going to become a software engineer. So it is again related to the laws, but the cyber laws. So we really want to thank our guest Sudhir K. Shankar, who is an expert on cyber laws, and we really look forward to have you in more programs of the practical side. Thank you very much for coming with us.
Thanks, Alok, for this excellent discussion that we had. I look forward to similar discussions in future as well. And I wish good luck for all the students who are aspiring to become technocrats and look to develop a career in information security. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that was the practical side with Sudhir K. Shankar, the expert on cyber laws. For more such episodes, subscribe to Excel Academy, your one-stop solution for the CS course. Thank you.